Hello, and welcome back to Dr. Logic Awkwardly Does Logic in her office. Today, I want to talk to you about unless. Now, when we were first introducing various truth functional operators that are used in propositional logic, conjunction, disjunction, negation, conditionals, I sort of waved my hands when it came to unless and said I would tell you more about it later. Well, now is later. We have all of the things that I need in order to be able to motivate to you how we should understand unless. Unless is a tricky connective because it isn't immediately obvious how it should be formalized. Is it something that can be reduced to the connectives that we already have, or is it some kind of primitive connective that we would need to introduce a new truth table for? I'm going to argue that the answer is we can represent it with what we already have. And in fact, unless in English just is inclusive disjunction. And that anytime that you see unless, you could cross that off and you could write or, and you would have a sentence that has exactly the same meaning. Now, if you go out and start doing that, you probably will have at least some amount of doubt and suspicion, be like, that doesn't sound right. But let me just talk you through some examples and show other sentences that they will be equivalent to, where suddenly I hope it will be a lot more kind of understandable why unless in propositional logic should be and just is treated as inclusive disjunction. Think about the sorts of sentences that you have that involve unless. So a stock example that I like to do is that I won't vacuum unless you wash the dishes. So you're trying to divide up chores with other members in your household and you strike bargains like this. Well, what are the consequences in which, what are the cases in which that sentence is false? So I won't vacuum unless you wash the dishes. Well, what happens if you wash the dishes and I don't vacuum? That is, here, let's go ahead and bring up our whiteboard. We love our whiteboard. So we are looking at the question of, so I won't do the dishes unless you vacuum. Now, what are the cases that we consider? We've got I do the dishes and you vacuum. I do dishes and you don't vacuum. I never know how to spell vacuum. I know it's two U's, but is it two C's or not? I don't know. This is not a spelling test, so don't come here for the spelling of vacuum. And then we have, no dishes and vacuuming, and we have no dishes and no vacuuming. So basically, these just are if P is I do the dishes and Q is you vacuum. These are just the four possible truth value combinations that we can get. So either P is true and Q is true, P is true and Q is false, P is false and Q is true, or they're both false. So there's the possibilities. So I want to say that this is the same as just crossing off the unless and writing or, so that we would render this sentence not P or Q. Let me turn this around into something equivalent to use this as my motivation. So one of the equivalencies that we looked at in a previous video is the equivalence between an implication and a disjunction where the antecedent has been negated. So if we have not P or Q, this is the same as saying if P, then Q. So if I do the dishes, then you vacuum. So this is asserting that your vacuuming is a necessary condition for my doing the dishes. And my doing the dishes is a sufficient condition for you vacuuming. So if you look at what this is saying, this is saying that the only case that I won't do the dishes is when you don't vacuum. So another sentence that this would be equivalent to, let me see if I can get some room here. I'm going to have to erase my writing out of the English. So you can turn essentially your promise into a threat by saying, well, if you don't vacuum, then I won't do the dishes. So this is also equivalent to this disjunction. It's just that I put the negation on this one and made it the antecedent. So all three of these are logically equivalent. So they all have exactly the same truth value. And I'm not going to go through all of the details. You can verify this for yourself. But each one of these expresses the same sentence. So I won't do the dishes unless you vacuum is going to be equivalent to if I do the dishes, then you vacuum. And if you don't vacuum, then I'm not doing the dishes. Once you can see that these are all appropriate ways of restating the same sentence, then because of the equivalence that we have between implications and disjunctions, it becomes easier to see how anytime that you see unless and you are working in a propositional logical context, just cross it off and write or instead. And this will give you a guide to the appropriate way to represent the English language sentences in propositional logic. This is also a reason why I am in favor of the material conditional. The material conditional is what allows you to have this interchangeability between implication and disjunction. It is what allows us to make sense of the connective unless. So I know I went through all my arguments in favor of the material conditional in an earlier video, but this is just another one of them. It works nicely. It plays well with the other connectives. So there's just a little bit about unless. Unless just is or you can also turn it into a conditional so long as you make sure that you add or remove negations appropriately. This is another reason why it's useful to look at semantic equivalences, because then knowing that certain things mean the same thing shows that, well, if you can kind of paraphrase or rewrite a sentence into something where you know where it's clear what the truth conditions are and what the structure is, once you get to that stage, then you know you can actually take any one of the semantically equivalent things and you will still get exactly the same meaning. So there you have it. That's about all that I want to say about the semantics of propositional logic, and that means it's time to get moving on to the proof theory. See you soon. Cheers.